Hi, Carol.
Hello there, Mitch. I'm glad you were able to get your whole face on the screen so nicely.
Yeah, you have to mess with it, sort of. I don't have a dog though to jump up and say hello.
Hello. I'm
Hi, Penny,
using
how are you?
my new to me refurbished computer that's got the weird camera, so we're just going to be weird tonight.
Oh, fine.
It's I have to angle it, and it's all and it's black and white, so I don't know what's wrong with it. I got it to work every other way, and it's taken 3 tries bringing it back to the shop. So
You're in color here.
oh, am I? Good. That's good to know, because what I see is
good.
is
I see a little bit of color there.
yeah. Well, I'm glad you're seeing it better than me, because what I see is nothing. It's gray.
Oh, okay.
Ray's brushing his teeth. He'll be with us soon.
That's fine. That's early.
He's very good. He brushes his teeth after every meal. I wait till I go to bed. Going over all my notes to try to, rehab remember everything.
Now, this doesn't look like a room in your house, Mitch. Where are you?
I'm in my kitchen. What makes you think it's not my kitchen?
Well, I guess it looks like you've got some kind of a balcony there.
Apparently they can see us better than we can see us.
Hey, Danita.
Hi. How's everybody?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Hi.
Stacey, putting out the I want people, but you don't forget. I want to thank them. Remembering our history, a shared story of sacrifice and victory. Aaron Gilpin shares. And that's my good news for this Monday. Thank you for watching, everyone. I'm Lester Holt. Please take care of yourself and
Yes, we're
There's Mary.
You want to sit on this side or you want to sit on this side?
That's David Sealing.
Yeah, but why don't you see if they have San Portofino or whatever?
Let me take this off.
Chef's night off.
True.
Like a different background? No. We could. That's Hugo. Okay.
There's David.
That's just not necessary. Not better?
Hi, David.
That's probably good. Oh,
So, snowed in Rochester yet?
Who is this? Dave. No, the other one. Nancy. The one was just there. Right, that's Nancy's one. Just try the Portofinos.
Just hang up and try
Yeah. No, try Portofino's. Because if they're that slow to pick up, imagine how slow they are to.
She's probably driving or something. She's on the phone.
Yeah, that's fine. That's.
Oops. Hello from South Carolina, everyone.
Hi, Nancy.
Oh, Nancy.
Hey, Nancy, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely. Was I unmuted before? I'm sorry if I was unmuted.
That's okay. You didn't say anything embarrassing.
Oh, good.
Are you, did you call the Zoom number, or are you going through the link that on the email as far as how you get in?
I looked at your email and you had
Yeah.
the Zoom link provided,
Okay,
and I just clicked on that.
yeah, because Dave was wondering if he could use his phone because he doesn't have any microphone on his computer. So I was just answering, yes, he could either use the link or do the number. The problem with that phone, they're using the phone numbers, there might be charges.
Oh, okay. Yep, that's what I've been using, my phone.
Okay, fine. Great,
Mhm.
thank you. Did I miss anything interesting on Sunday at St. Luke?
Always.
What?
Always, I said.
That's what I would say.
Great sermon. Not sure if there's anything else exciting.
The kids' sermon is always sermon. Exciting. You got big kids and little kids, and then you got the big kids only. But other than that, service is taking an hour and a half now. I bet Bob Simpson's real happy about that.
You know, worship is like a baseball game.
That's right.
It takes as long as it takes. I mean, you have to get out of a football mentality. See, baseball is God's game. Think about it. I mean, you know, there's no time, you know, and the object is to go home. I mean, football, on the other hand, is played on the clock, and you know, it's just like war, you know. So I think that, you know, we need to have a baseball mentality in this. Maybe we should have a seventh inning stretch after the second hymn.
Yeah, everybody run around like the kids.
Why don't you get up so you take me out to the ball game?
Yeah.
Doesn't seem that long to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I
what-
know. I was surprised, but if you go back on the YouTubes, they're like an hour and at least an hour and 20 minutes. And I said, wow, we used to have hour-long churches, which doesn't bother me at all, but we've added this an extra lesson.
Right.
The psalm.
Right.
Yeah, the
psalm.
psalm and an extra lesson. So instead of 2 lessons only, we have 4, technically. That helps.
You've got everything you actually should have now. It used to be we cut out stuff because, I mean, that's the advantage of having only one service is you're not actually on the clock.
Well, I think in another month, we'll be deciding, the council will be deciding what we're doing about a second service.
I think it's great that we have one service because that means we have one congregation instead of 2 congregations. It's
I've been
hard
trying
enough
to
to
notice
keep.
if the number of people we have is related to the 2nd and 4th Sunday school learning hour Sundays. I haven't established that pattern yet. I suspect that's part of it.
I have is that you, David, on this phone number?
Uh-oh.
Hi, this is Janet. I just called in.
Oh, hi, Janet. How are you?
Hi, good. I'm back, but I'm
Oh,
just
good.
driving now, so
Okay.
hope everyone is well.
Okay, sometime send me an email as to when I can give you your JSP.
Great, I will do. And
Okay.
I would love that. Thank you.
You live in Ledger?
No, but right now I'm in New York, which I'll be here for probably most of this week, and then I'll be back up probably on Monday.
Okay. All right. Well, I can do whatever is most convenient for you. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Yeah. When I get my schedule sorted, I'll send you an email with, and I can come by and pick it up. So
Okay.
thank you for your patience. But I've been traveling a lot lately, so I'm a moving target, as they say.
Okay, I've got David on the line. Or David's trying to get on the line. So we'll sit here and watch him look befuddled. And while we're watching David be befuddled, is there any questions about anything we've done so far? Any particular challenges for anybody? So tonight we are going to have Professor Cohen. It will be lesson 5 from his lectures, and it'll be about what he calls the 4 rebellions, and he'll go through those. And then next week we'll go back to Professor Hayes. I wanted you to hear her lecture on the flood story and the background for that before we I think it'll be better background for Professor Cohen's and his students' presentation. And then we'll go from there. And I know Diane Hansen is out of town. And Pastor Heidi has another meeting. So, and the recordings have all been posted, so that's been caught up. So if anybody has any trouble accessing them, let me know. I can talk to Lee. But I have gone to the YouTube channel and they seem to work. So. Although it's always disconcerting watching yourself talk. So let's see. It's getting on towards 10 after 7. I think everybody's here that's going to be. So on that, I will. And again, if I do have my phone with me, so I did think I turned off my email, so we should not get those dings again. But if anybody has any issues trying to get in, please send me a text or use the chat. And at the moment now, I'm going to mute folks. Okay. And we'll share the screen. We'll share the sound. Okay. You can use sign language, Dave.
Okay, today we're looking at the primeval history. Namely, these are the chapters of Genesis from Genesis chapter. Okay, today we're looking at the primeval history. Namely, these are the chapters of Genesis from Genesis chapter 1, which we've already looked at a bit, the creation of the world, down through Genesis chapter 11. These are chapters that deal with the world as a whole, the human population as a whole. And it's only starting with Genesis chapter 12 that the focus of the narrator zooms in and remains zoomed in for the rest of the Hebrew Bible, practically, focusing on the history of one particular family, clan, people, right? That's coming up in Genesis chapter 12 and on. So here we're in this section, still called the primeval history. So that's, we're looking at that today, the larger picture, Genesis 1 through Genesis 11. Monday, I'm hoping we'll zoom in and look very carefully at the flood narrative, perhaps the most famous, or world famous, one of the famous episodes in these chapters. And there we will look at the documentary hypothesis to see if it really, we believe it or not, or what its assumptions may be, and sort of conclude that our discussion about how to read the Bible, which we began on the very first session. That's what we're doing Monday. Then Wednesday we're on to Abraham and chapter 12 and following. Okay, so today the primeval history. So I've given you on your lecture notes a handy outline of these first 11 chapters, so you can see how they all hang together or they don't. I'm not going to read through them all. You can see them right there on the page, as well as in your Bible. The key point is the point I make below at the end of the list. This is something we'll see in the book of Genesis and indeed in the Torah as a whole. We don't really have organic narratives, right? It's hard to see something as what we would recognize as a coherent narrative, in the sense that we'd see, let's say, in reading fiction or a novel, where we have a carefully plotted out story, right? And the story clearly sustains itself over a long period of time. For example, 300 pages, or perhaps over many years in the novel's view of things. It's hard to see that kind of narrative anywhere in the Torah. It will come closest, as we will see, in the Joseph story, the last third of the book of Genesis, where we do seem to have a single coherent story. Otherwise, what you have in the Torah, and indeed, I would say in all biblical narrative, are strings of episodes. Here something happened, then something happened, and then something else happened, and then here's something else that happened, and then the next thing happened. Right? Which you have a string of episodes. You could conceivably take the episodes, rearrange them, and you would hardly notice anything. And it's not as if one episode depends upon the other for information. As often as not, it just doesn't. These are simply episodes in the life of Abraham, as we will see. Episodes in the life of Isaac, very few. Episodes in the life of Jacob. Right? That's the standard way of narration. We see that here too. We have a string of episodes in these primeval history. Of course, creation has to come first. You can't move that around, right? So there is a certain logic in their flow. But having said that, each episode seems to stand by itself. So, for example, the Cain and Abel story, which we'll talk about in a little bit, right? This seems to be a story all by itself. It doesn't go anywhere, doesn't lead to anything, doesn't follow from anything. It just is. When it's done, it's done. The narrator goes on to the next story. So I'm not sure it's a function of style, or it's a function of, once again, sources, or how we are to explain this, but the narrator is not writing a narrative that we would recognize as a single coherent narrative. That's a big observation to make, and you'll see that again and again as we move through the biblical narratives. Second, as you see on the lecture notes, I highlight in bold, right, what I'm calling rebellions against God. Here embedded in these stories are 4 episodes of rebellion against God. First rebellion against God is Adam, Eve, the serpent in the garden, which concludes with their expulsion from the garden. That's one episode. Next episode, next rebellion would be the murder of Abel by Cain, murder of Abel by his brother, which concludes with Cain is also expelled. He is expelled from wherever. He is condemned to a life of wandering. With some very cryptic verses. Condemned to a life of wandering. That's the second rebellion against God. Then the third rebellion against God is the biggest of all, which is there's evil in the world as well as miscegenation between the beautiful daughters, human daughters, and heavenly creatures, or members of the divine council, however you want to translate some obscure Hebrew words. And that is followed by or somehow connected with the eruption of evil in the world, which in turn brings about the flood, which in turn brings about the new creation, a new beginning. And the last of these rebellions is the famous Tower of Babel story, right? In which humans get uppity and want to build a city, or is it a tower? Or is it a city with a tower? Well, whatever. One of those. And God does not like it for unexplained reasons. God takes umbrage at this and understands it to be a rebellion. And this also ends with an expulsion. The humans are expelled, and therefore that's why they populate the entire face of the earth, because they were once in one place, but as a result of the Tower of Babel, they are scattered far and wide. The fourth act of rebellion. Modern Bible scholars say 3 of these stories all come from J. The flood story is a combo, as we'll discuss on Monday. Or is it? But that we'll discuss on Monday. Anyway, the other 3 are stories that are attributed to this mysterious J source. Anyway, that's a big theme. I recognize here a theme. And this theme exemplifies the last point I was making on Monday, which is that these stories have as their point, right, that God is the creator God, and that God established not just creation, but God established a moral order in the world. This is a moral God, right, who demands moral behavior and will punish deviance from it. I mean, all these 4 episodes of rebellion against God, presume that, are based on this fundamental belief, this fundamental teaching. Now, what's particularly interesting, at least on pursuing this line of inquiry, is that God doesn't have to tell you something is wrong for you to be guilty of violating it. Or at least that's what these narrators seem to think, that you should know better. So a classic example is Cain. Cain kills his brother Abel. Why does he kill his brother Abel? Because he's furious. He's jealous. He's angry. He feels Cain, has been mistreated, and Abel has gotten away with something. Or has somehow, I don't know, how come he won that big fellowship and I didn't? How come he got a MacArthur? I'm a genius also, huh? So Cain is furious and jealous, and rises up and kills his brother, for which he suffers a punishment from God. Okay, fine. This is the first recorded murder in human history, according to the Bible. Question, class. Where and when did God tell humans that they may not murder each other? Nowhere. God, in the 6th day of creation, told humans to be fruitful and multiply. So Adam and Eve got at it and be fruitful and multiply. Okay, fine. They shouldn't eat some mysterious fruit from some mysterious tree. Okay, so I'm not sure exactly what's going on there, but okay, and they can't do that, as it says, God said to Adam and Eve, you can eat any fruit you want, just don't eat that one. So of course, what do? They eat that one, of course. Okay, so that we understand. But where does God tell Cain, or anybody, that murder is prohibited? Yes?
On Mount Sinai to Moses?
On Mount Sinai to Moses, that is correct, right? Murder is prohibited in the 10 Commandments, that is correct. Not thou shalt not kill, but thou shalt not murder, as we'll discuss when we get there. Okay, so murder is prohibited, that is true. However, does Cain know the 10 Commandments? No, I would respectfully observe that he's only in chapter 4 of Genesis, and the 10 Commandments don't come until Exodus chapter 20. So he's innocent. So how does he know he's not supposed to murder his brother? Yeah, Tom?
Maybe the apple.
Ooh, maybe the apple, the tree of knowledge, good and evil. I hadn't thought of that one. That's good. I like that. Yes, what's your name again?
Rebecca.
Rebecca, yes, Rebecca.
I was gonna say maybe it's sort of implicit in human consciousness.
Yeah, that's what I think what the narrator would say, is that you should know. Right? You, human being, created in the image of God, you're supposed to know this. I don't have to tell you, or at least the narrator seems to assume that God assumes that you're supposed to know that murder is a bad thing. And consequently, if you do it, I, God, have the right to punish you. Again, because this is a moral God with a moral creation. Yes, ma'am?
Well, in Genesis, in the Garden of Eden, it says that God walked and talked with Adam.
Right.
So he talked with him about a lot of things. So we don't know that he didn't tell them what not to do. Also.
That's beautiful. That's wonderful. Right. Welcome to the world of Bible exegesis. Welcome to the world of Midrash, right? Which scholars sit around and, supply what is missing from Scripture. Right. Right. They would say, well, Adam and Eve surely were talking. He must have told Adam a lot more stuff than what happens to be recorded in Scripture. This is a perfectly wonderful way to read Scripture. Right. However, for us modern Bible scholar types, we're not thoroughly convinced by that mode of reading because, it's hard to prove what's not there. But having said that, I love it. Other suggestions? So you understand the problem. Right. So Cain is being punished for a sin, but how was he supposed to know it was a sin within the logic of the text itself? Well, the answer has to be something like that God has the right to punish humans even without specifically prohibiting them about something which they should know. We seem to have the same fundamental idea in the case of the flood, right? In which we're told in chapter 6, or is it chapter 5? End of 5, or beginning of 6, right? That the world is filled with violence. V'timalei haaretz chamas. If that's the right translation of the word Hamas. Right, translation, where the world's filled with violence, or illicit violence. Clearly a bad thing. Right, and God therefore gets angry and fed up. And realizes that these human beings, I just can't do a thing with them. I'm just going to wipe them out and start over again. Except for Noah, because Noah is a righteous man. Now, excuse me, God. One second. I got a problem here again. Where exactly did you prohibit violence? How are they supposed to know it's prohibited? And second of all, Noah is righteous. By what criterion? Explain to me what righteous is. I mean, show me what rules did he observe? Right, what sins did he avoid? I mean, give me the particulars. What do you mean he's righteous? Once again, the text does not do that. So again, the narrator seems to assume that God is allowed to assume that human beings know right from wrong. They should have known that the life of violence is bad. And they should know that Noah was an exemplar of righteousness. You object, but the particulars are missing. Okay, they're missing, but you should know. So again, this is the key insight, I think, in these chapters, that God is the creator God, that God is a moral God who created a moral order, a moral universe, and you human beings are supposed to know how to behave. Because you are meant to be moral creatures. And somehow, the text does not explain this, you're supposed to know right from wrong. It doesn't matter if you're an Israelite, it doesn't matter if you're not an Israelite, it doesn't matter. Okay. This will change after the flood. After the flood in chapter 9, and hopefully we'll have time to look at chapter 9 on Monday when we discuss the flood narrative. After the flood narrative, God finally says, okay, I got to get specific. Clearly with these human beings, you got to give them rules. So in chapter 9 is when we have explicitly a statement from God, the first time in which God is instructing Noah and his children, in other words, humanity, there's only humans that are left, for Noah and his wife and 3 sons and their wives, right? They're the only human beings left. Here they do get instructions from God. God says, I won't wipe the earth out in a flood again. I won't do that again, I promise. But you guys got to behave. And specifically what's outlined there is murder. Right, you humans have the right to slaughter animals and kill them. But provided you don't eat the blood, you may kill them and eat them. However, my permission to you to murder, to kill, extends only to animals, not to other humans. Because murder is prohibited. That's the message we hear about in Genesis chapter 9, in which the narrator sort of understands that with God and humans and punishment and so on, you got to be explicit. You got to lay things out, be fair. At least that's how I understand chapter 9. That the second time around, God recognizes human proclivity to violence and channels it into slaughter of animals, and therefore humans may eat meat, but they may not commit murder. Footnote, provided they don't eat blood. Later readers who are reading these chapters of sin, rebellion, expulsion, punishment, sin, evil, right, they find in these chapters statements about the beginnings of evil. Most famously, of course, the serpent who seduced Eve into eating the, quote, apple, unquote. Reminder, it's not really an apple, it doesn't say it's an apple, it just says it's a fruit unspecified. Okay, back to where I was. Right, so who is this mysterious serpent who seduces Eve into eating of the forbidden fruit? Later readers, mostly Christian readers, understand the serpent to represent the devil, the evil one, Lucifer, the dark side, call it whatever you like. Right, Satan. All right, well, let's call him Satan. Right? Now we have here the oppositional force. Right? We have God and the good guys on the one side. Then we have the bad guys, namely the forces of Satan and evil, lined up on the other. And here in the Garden of Eden, at the very beginning of humankind, well, we find a clash. Right? The two are brought together in this eternal conflict. This is a way, of course, that Christians have long read this story, perhaps most famously through the writings of Saint Augustine, right, in the 5th century. It gets more complicated, of course, because we have to connect sex with this somehow. Right, exactly. That in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve did not know they were naked, i.e. there was no lust, right, there was no sexual lust, according to Augustine. And the sin, of course, is not the sin of the sexual act. The sin, of course, is the sin of lust, which comes after they've eaten of the fruit, or should I say, eat of the fruit. Wink, wink. Right. That is the discovery of sex, and that is the whole notion then of sin and original sin, and then humankind depends on the grace of God, and then we need Christ, etc. Okay, that's bigger than I want to discuss right now. But a key element in that vision is serpent, Satan, evil. You can find analogs to that reading in Jewish sources also, but the version I just gave you is, I believe, hopefully I was accurate, right, is the classic, or a classic, and in the West, the classic mode of reading of the story. Small footnote, I would simply observe that this is not the Jewish reading of the story. I'm not even sure it is a Jewish reading of the story. I'll just bring to your attention a small note in the JSB. I have here the low-tech hard copy. If you look at the note on Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. This is after the expulsion from the garden. Adam and Eve now are modestly attired, and they have to work the land. They don't get, it's not a fellowship anymore. We get free food. They have to go to work, till the soil, etc., and Eve will bear children in pain and suffering which is the curse of womankind. That's as we see in chapter 3. Okay, all that is presumed. Now the narrator continues. Now the man, I would say Adam. Now Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain. And it says in a footnote here, knew often in a sexual sense. Okay, yeah, we figured that out. Okay, fine. Right. Then there's an interesting footnote in the annotations, chapter 4, verse 1. The verb translated knew may have the sense of had known. Rashi thinks the conception of Cain occurred in the Garden of Eden, before his parents had sinned. In other words, class, according to that reading, does sex have anything to, in human reproduction, does that have anything to do with the sin in the Garden of Eden? Come on, you can do better. Does human reproduction and sexual intercourse have anything to do with sin in the Garden of Eden, according to that reading of that verse?
No.
No! Thank you. So the narrative I gave you before is the classic Western reading from Augustine, but it represents not necessarily the only way to read these verses. Far from it. Anyway, back to where I was. I wasn't interested in sex. I was interested in the serpent. I am interested in sex, but that's a different discussion. I am the father of 4, okay? So there. Yeah. That's enough. Keep going. Shaye, you're getting in trouble. Okay, so the serpent equals Satan. All right, serpent equals Satan in this reading. Similarly, as Kugel discusses, Cain represents Cain, the evil brother who murdered the innocent, righteous, perfect Abel. Right? He too is, in some readings, is understood to be Satan. Similarly, these mysterious fallen angels of chapter 6, right before the flood story. Here, I'm going to have to read you the verse. This is chapter 6, verse 1. When men began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them, comma, this is chapter 6, verse 1, chapter 6, verse 2, the divine beings, that's what it says, the divine beings, footnote, others, the sons of God, unquote, saw how beautiful the daughters of men were and took wives from among those that pleased them. If you ask me, Professor, what did you just read? What's going on here? I have to say in response, I don't know. I know it's interesting, but what is going on here? Something about the divine beings, sons of God, who look on the daughters of human women and find them attractive and apparently unite with them. Jews in late antiquity read those verses and assumed that this is a story of miscegenation, right? But a story of evil. That somehow lurking behind this very mysterious verse, and the next verse, God goes on to say how the humankinds are devising evil all the time. They understood this verse also as a statement of fallen angels. Right, this is where Paradise Lost comes from. It comes from here. Right, this is a story of fallen angels. And who was fallen? Of course, it's Satan. The angel who gets kicked out of heaven or thrown out of heaven and falls to earth. Right, that is Satan. That's Paradise Lost. So put it together. Many early readers looked and found in these chapters not just stories about the moral God, but also stories about the origins of evil, and specifically the origins of the evil one, namely Satan. So now I'm going to ask, well, okay, I understand this is how they read these stories, this is how they understood them, and it's important that we acknowledge this is how they read them. Did they read them correctly? Or, that's the wrong way to say it. I would say, do we like this reading? Do we approve of this reading? Do we think that this reading, in fact, is an appropriate way to read and interpret these wonderful stories? I, Shaye Cohen, think the answer is no. Right, while I completely allow Christians to read the Bible any way they want, and in fact, I'm very liberal. I think Jews also can read the Bible any way they want. It's a free country. Read the Bible, interpret it as you wish. Now, if you're asking me, is that what the Bible is really going on here? Do we see in the Bible, in these early stories, statements of not cosmic monism, but cosmic dualism, where we see that the world hangs in the balance in this eternal struggle between good and evil, between God and Satan? I just don't see it. I think these poor stories, or innocent little stories, are not about that. Not about the origins of evil. They're the opposite. The point of the stories is morality. The point of the story is God enforcing morality and enforcing a moral order in the world that God created. And the devil and Satan and fallen angels, I don't know. I think these little stories, these little stories will not bear that weight. If that's where these stories wanted to go, if that was an essential part of the story, surely the narrator would have spelled this out and made this unmistakable. Surely we would have noticed that this is the point of the story, but it's not. So I see these as later rereadings, reinterpretations, projecting into the story a whole series of ideas that are not in the story itself. Who is this mysterious serpent? I don't know. It's a folklore motif. Talking serpent, a talking snake. Let's start with that. It's a talking snake. All right, this is the world of folklore. There's a problem with all these cosmic dualist views. Which you could argue is a synonym for Christianity, or classical Christianity, which sees the world indeed in these terms, right? Then you need Jesus Christ to save you, because without that you're doomed. Right? This is classic at least Western Christian thought. You push it though, you realize of course you haven't solved anything with the cosmic dualist, because I want to ask, well, why does God allow this? Why doesn't God just put an end to it? Take his hand and get rid of Satan. Right? Why do we humans have to suffer so, right, in this eternal conflict? Why doesn't God just take care of the problem? I don't have an answer to that, right? But that's a problem I have with any of these dualist systems, because at the end of the day, God will reward the righteous. God will bring an end to the forces of darkness and evil, right? God will redeem those who deserve to be redeemed, right? But just not yet. Right, so there is still a sense of Satan is not a whole excuse for misbehaving. Liquor made me do it. No, that's not an excuse. You should know better. Tricky. All right, as you see, there's still a moral problem here. But so moral dualism solves some of the problem of why is there evil in the world. Right, the monist who sees everything as under the direct control of God, right, has more trouble explaining. It's much easier to say, well, let's blame Satan. But at the nth degree, I still have a problem. But just pushes the problem a little further away. All right, this is how I, Shaye Cohen, understand these things. No doubt greater minds than I have worked things out in much more sophisticated ways. But stories, now I'd like to just briefly go through these 4 stories, these rebellion stories, and look at them. And hopefully we'll end in time. And then on Monday we'll look carefully at the flood story. Okay? Rebellion number 1, Adam, Eve in the garden. Well, we've been talking about this already. And I have a quote from the New England Primer, a famous New England Primer, 1777, but actually it's older than that, but the online edition that I dug up was from 1777, right? Which gives you a nice little ditty for each of the letters of the alphabet. And for A, the ditty is, in Adam's fall, we sinned all. Well, again, that's a good Christian reading of the story. But as I was just trying to say now, I don't think that's what the story quote is really, unquote, about. As I discussed already last time, the story is an etiological story, right? It explains why things are the way they are, why men are the way they are, why women are the way they are, why the human society is structured the way it is, and why it is so hard to make a living. In other words, why it's so hard to grow food, right? Why that is a struggle, why is that a perennial struggle? So that's what the story quote is about. I'm not sure it's about in Adam's fall we sinned all. The interesting question there is, how do we understand mortality in that story? We understand psychologically we link sex and death. This we understand, right? These are oppositional categories, right? On one hand, we humans die. On the other hand, we have immortality through our children. So maybe there's something like that maybe going on in the story, maybe. But by the same token, I'm not sure sex is in that story. That's in the eye of the beholder. And the real mystery is, were Adam and Eve created immortal? On this point, the story is completely ambiguous. Right? Apparently, they were not created immortal, because otherwise I don't understand why that little piece at the end, where God says to his, associates, whoever they are, he says, look, they ate the tree of knowledge, and look, the trouble they're into already. If we let them eat of the tree of life, they'll be just like us. In other words, if they don't eat the tree of, in other words, they're not immortal yet, but if they eat of the tree of life, if we let them stay here any longer, they'll eat the tree of life, and then they will become immortal. So we better kick them out before they do that, which would imply that they are immortal to begin with. Okay, so I'm a little confused by that story, and that story you should read very carefully. Augustine spent his whole life reading that story. Augustine spent his whole life really trying to get at the inner mysteries of that story. Anyway, I'm not convinced that we have here the devil, the demon, cosmic dualism, evil. I think that's putting too much weight on this poor story, but I freely concede that story is, requires repeated reading. So next rebellion story is Cain and Abel, right? So Cain and Abel we're told, are brothers, sons of Adam and Eve, right? And one fine day they each decide to bring an offering to God. Abel brought an offering from the firstborn, or perhaps choice sheep from the flock, right? And his brother Cain brought fruits and vegetables. Which one do you think God likes better? Is God like meat, or is God a vegetarian? Meat, vegetarian. Which one? Meat. Right. God likes meat. And as we see later on in the temple cult, God likes roast meat. We see the story in Noah. God likes roast meat in particular. So poor Cain, who brought there, standing there with his vegan offering, right? Poor Cain is just out on a limb. And he gets very upset, as we discussed already. The narrator does not explain why God prefers the gift of Abel, preferring the gift of Abel over the gift of Cain. It's something all interpreters will struggle with, trying to understand what was wrong. In fact, the way the story is told, Cain has the idea first. Cain brings an offering to God, and then Abel also brings an offering. So Cain gets there first. So what terrible thing did Cain do that God indicates clear preference for the gift of Abel over the gift of Cain? And then God speaks to Cain in some very cryptic words, right, which interpreters from antiquity to today are not quite sure how to translate. Some very, very cryptic words, and that is followed by Cain rising up in the next verse and killing his brother. We see in that story also the eternal conflict between farmers and ranchers. I'm tempted to say this is the American West story here, right? It's a story of barbed wire, right? We farmers like barbed wire, right? And of course ranchers hate it, until ranchers of course embrace it. But okay, we have then, do we want the open prairie or we want farm? So we have a conflict between the farmer and the rancher, and this story endorses the rancher. Farmer is going to lose out. Interesting motif in this story. So Cain, after killing his brother, is cursed by God, cursed to a life of wandering. Navanati ba'aretz. You will be a wanderer, a Bedouin, itinerant. And Kugel talks about this motif, right? You won't have a single place. But what does Cain then go out and do? Then it says he founds a city. I never quite understood this, right? How someone condemned to a life of wandering then turns around and founds a city. By the way, Bible trivia, right? This is the first city mentioned in Scripture, is the city founded by Cain. 10 points. The name of the city was? This is Bible trivia time. Vayi boneh ir vayikra shem ha'ir k'shem beno Chanoch. Chanoch was the name of the city, or Enoch in English. Okay, fine. That's just Bible trivia. So he founds a city. So why a man condemned to eternal wandering is the one in Scripture who builds the first city, I cannot explain that. However, I do understand why a murderer is the first person to build a city, probably a commentary on urban crime. This is Shaye Cohen's insight into the story. Whom did Cain marry, I ask on the Bible lecture notes. This is an interesting problem, because after Cain is condemned to a life of wandering, it says that he marries and then he has children. Okay, I understand that part, but where do these wives come from? Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel. Cain kills Abel, that leaves Adam, Eve, and Cain. And then Cain gets married and has children. You understand the problem? Right? Something is missing. Right. I'm not the first person to notice this, but the narrator seems to assume there are women around there, and somehow he marries one of them. So you read the narrative, right? You see if you can figure that out. If you have a good answer for that, let me know, by the way. Okay. Next we come to the miscegenation story, to which I already alluded, and the flood. Kugel here has a very nice chapter on the flood in the reading, right? The flood stories are found in many cultures, as Kugel talks about, and there's absolutely no doubt. Here I won't say surely, because I really am sure, right, that the Bible flood story has connections with Babylon, right? As Kugel and everybody observes, no Israelite reader living in the land of Israel is going to come up with a flood story. Because if anything, Israel suffers from drought, not from floods. So in a drought society, one dreams of floods. Right, so the flood story comes from the well-watered basin of Mesopotamia, between the two mighty rivers of the Tigris and the Euphrates. There we understand you have flood stories. So there's no question the story comes from Babylon. Again, the key point is not whether the story comes from Babylon, whether it comes from the Gilgamesh epic or something or not. That, to my mind, that's not terribly interesting or important to understand the biblical story. Again, the Bible turns the flood story, again, into a morality tale, which is not in the Gilgamesh story. Right? Here in the Bible, the flood story is used as a way, again, of enforcing the same message. The message is, be righteous before the Lord, because if you are wicked, you will be punished. And the flood story is a spectacular example of divine punishment. That's not in the parallel flood stories in Babylon. That's what the Israelites did with the story when they took it. Okay, two parallel versions, we'll talk about that on Monday. Now, let's talk about this human miscegenation thing again. That seems to be a background of the story here, and this seems to be a piece of mythology. As I talked about last time, the creation story seems to be reacting to or being aware of mythological versions. Well, this seems to be a piece of mythology. This is like Zeus, right? Zeus, right, who couldn't keep his hands off any human woman that he saw. Right, was constantly fathering children, right, to have with paternity of divine father and human maternity. Here we seem to have a similar kind of story, where members of the divine council see human women and run after them and join with them, or take them as wives. Every Bible reader will sense that something is odd here. The story just gets going, and as soon as it gets going, it stops. It seems to be a fragment of something. Once upon a time, here I'll say surely, this was a longer story. This was more interesting. We had names, dates, facts, figures. We have story, we have drama, we have passion. All that is hidden from us, and all that is left is one extraordinarily cryptic verse. There are some other similar fragments located in various places in Scripture. Perhaps the next best example that I can think of is the one in Exodus chapter 4, where again there's a 3-verse fragment, where God threatens to kill Moses or maybe Moses' son, I'm not sure which. And Moses' wife, Mrs. Moses, rescues him by cutting off somebody's foreskin. An extraordinary story, which appears unannounced. The story's over, it's never referred to ever again. Sure looks like a piece of something bigger that somehow three verses survived and the rest is gone. Similarly here, I would say, it looks like there was once a much bigger story and the narrator somehow was left with one little fragmentary verse. I would argue too the reference to Serach bat Asher, whose name appears in genealogical tables, but otherwise not, but daughters aren't mentioned in genealogies. The only other daughter mentioned in the genealogies of Jacob is Dinah, and Dinah gets a whole chapter to herself, which is chapter 34, not a very pretty chapter. Dinah gets a story to herself. So, but Serach, daughter of Asher, who is she? And why is she singled out for mention? I don't know. Surely there was a story about her once, and it's lost. Anyways, these fragments appear occasionally in the Torah, and I assume this also is a fragment. Tower of Babel story. This one is again clearly from Babylon. In fact, it says so on it, Babel. Right? The Bible is not hiding anything. So this confirms that this is a piece of mythology, originally from Babylon, some story which we can't reconstruct anymore exactly. But again, in the Bible, it turns into a morality story. Right? The story of human beings trying to build a mighty city, a mighty tower. Right? That story becomes, in the hands of the biblical narrator, the story of sin and punishment, as well as an etiological tale. Why do humans live everywhere? Why do humans have different languages? Why are humans unable to talk to each other? Answer, Tower of Babel. Explains it all. So it's an etiological tale as well as a morality tale. The two are mixed together. Okay, everybody, have a wonderful weekend. Hope you enjoy section today and tomorrow. And I look forward to seeing you back on Monday.
Okay. Let's see. So people should be able to unmute. So does everybody have any thoughts or comments on hearing that?
I wasn't satisfied with what he had to say about the serpent. I don't think he ever really said what the Hebrews thought the serpent represented, or where the serpent came from. He just was seeming to say it's not the devil.
It was one of many things that he brings up and then kind of leaves it. Maybe he's expecting the students to write essays that explain it all.
That could be,
Right.
he covered a lot.
Yeah, there was a lot of things that were brought up and said, this doesn't make any sense or it doesn't follow. It's just perusing through a little bit, following things that he mentioned. I guess the Christian version of some of these things is quite different. I don't remember seeing anything about other beings coming down and intermarrying. I'll be, intermarrying with human women.
So that is in the text. We don't make much of it, I guess, because people don't understand it.
Well, it's.
I have a comment about the serpent. Carol.
Yes, yeah.
He doesn't try to tell us what a tree is. The tree just is. And I think that's what he was saying about the serpent. It just is. same as the tree.
But then the role of the serpent in the story, how does he explain that?
Well,
That's what I'm questioning.
yeah, he doesn't try to any more than he tries to explain the role of the tree.
I remember him saying that the serpent, a talking serpent, meets that folklore genre.
Yes, definitely. So it is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, but I think you make an important point that I think maybe his point was, like Mary said, that I don't think they tried to read anything into the serpent other than, like she said, the serpent was there. I think, if I'm doing this from memory, but I think it said it was the craftiest creature or something like that. But I think it's like he said, that it was the story was designed to explain why things are the way they are.
Mhm.
Fancy words, etiological. But the point is that he was trying to, people later on, people say, why do we have to work so hard? Why do women suffer in child? Why do these things? And that was an explanation.
Right.
And snakes always get a bad rap.
I think he also said that it was in the narrative.
So. Now, next week, Professor Hayes will go a little more in depth on some of the background of the flood story that he kind of glossed over. So you'll get some more information on that piece. One of the things that struck me, it was early on in his presentation, was he was talking about Genesis and the way that, and you'll see this in a lot of the books of the Hebrew Bible, and is that it's basically episodes, but the overarching narrative is really sometimes hard to, it's not like reading a story where there's a clear beginning and a clear end and some stuff happening that progresses to that point. And I was even thinking, when you look at some of the Gospels, that they are really episodic too. It's a similar sort of style that granted, they do, the ones that have a birth narrative put that at the beginning, but the rest of them seem to be events until you get to the Passion story. And then again, that sort of progresses of its own. So that may be something common in Near Eastern writing styles.
Sorry.
Other thoughts? No. Okay, well, we will reconvene again next week, same time. And if you hear anybody wants to join us, please feel free to share the Zoom link with them. And also let anybody, if you talk to anybody and it says, I really can't stand Zoom, I would rather do it live, tell them I'm perfectly willing to meet people at the church. I can do this from the church. So that I can, basically plug it into the TV so people there. Davis watched me do it, so so that I can do that. It's just the times I've gone to the church, there's been nobody there. So, but I would be quite happy to do that for anybody that is zoomed out already in life. So, okay. Tell Suzanne we said hi, David.
And thank you, Mitch.
Okay, tell Rudy we said hi, Carol. Good night.
Good night.
Everyone.
Good night, Mitch.
Spare this.